Well, once again, welcome to Qdabra's weekly webinar, and thanks for watching today. We have another new topic for you, and today we're talking about dashboards, but specifically how to do filtering and sorting for large tables via the dashboard demo. And we've got a bunch of things to talk about, but first, the reason why, well, the things we're going to show today are these 6 items here. So we've got a bunch of stuff to show you, several demos. Before we get started, though, I've just got one quick question for you, and that is how many submits does your most active or most used form process get per month? And this is a good determiner of a form that you may want to make into a dashboard form, or and that's kind of the topic for today, even though we're going to show these specific techniques. Looks like most of you have 100 to 1,000. There's a few below that, but nobody has a form process that takes more than 1,000 submits per month. Okay, well, this is obviously will work in any scenario, but that we're going to obviously target the scenarios where we've got a lot of data. So even if you're just doing 10 or 20 submits a month, that's still totally reasonable because you want to look at the data and filter it and sort it and give your users a way to do that. And that's really the main purpose of this webinar today, is to show these techniques of how to filter and sort tables so that people can quickly see stuff. So I'm going to quickly show a demo of a form that we did. So we've got a bunch of demos for you today. Here's this old kind of lame webinar management form that we were using for a webinar. As you can see, today's webinar is right there. I can click on edit and it opens this thing up below. What we did for today's webinar is we kind of made it look a lot better, and I have to thank Mel and Dawn for that. Here's the new form, and you can see this has got a much better look and feel to it. But more importantly, it's got these buttons here where the column headers are, and this is going to allow us to filter based on when we click on them. I can just look at the 2021s. I can show the upcoming only, which would show none. Well, actually, we've got 2 that should be marked as done. 2022, we've just got these 3 upcoming, and these actually directly map to our webpage. So if you go to qdabra.com, education, webinars, you'll see just those 3. We can do that. But you see this technique for filtering is showing us all the data, and then I can click on the one I want to edit. For example, I want to go into next. We're not going to do one next week, but the week after that, if I want to click on that one, I've got this nice overlay pop up, and I can edit my data. Now, obviously, if your form's got a lot of data in it, the overlay might not be the best approach. This is really good for small sets of data. But if you've got a couple page worth of data, you probably want to switch them to a separate view or open a separate tab. And we've covered those in previous webinars. But the idea here is you've got this quick filter on top, and we can remove the filter. I think we can search for something else. I can toggle whether the webinar is published or not, and look at all the ones that weren't published, and so on. Right? I can search for. I can actually change the title, sort. I can search. And I need to change this. I guess I've got too many filters in there now. I don't have a publish for this. Okay, so let's try that again. So there we go. Create sorts and filters. Okay, so that's a quick example. And to show you how this is done, I'm going to switch to Mel. And I want to thank her and Dawn again for this wonderful spiff, beautified webinar form, but also for getting the demo prepared for today. So Mel, would you like to show how you did it?
Yeah, I would love to. Let me show my screen here. Okay. So yeah, Patrick showed you, I hope you can see my screen. Patrick showed the before look of the webinar management form. I got a different version. This one was a little bit spiffed already, but I just wanted to show this because the version before had separate rows for those dates and titles, those filterable headers, so to speak, and apart from the sorting icons here. And if I click presenter, yeah, I get another row for those filter drop down and whatnot. So The improved version, we only have those in one line here, the header title as well as the sorting icons there. Although if I start clicking on or start entering my search text, we obviously need a wider text box there. So that's what we're providing as the second line there. So the key thing that we are using to make that happen is using the CSS Flex property. Right here, if we look at the title column here, we see that I'm using Flex. It's indicated right there. If we look at the CSS block here, we see that I'm displaying it as Flex. And what it does is, by default, if we specify a section in your form to use Flex, it will like the children, like let me see here. If this is the parent section and all its children, like this first div here holds the header title or the header text. Second div holds that sorting icon. So each of these children then would be laid out on the form by row, which is the default in using Flex. But if I do like Flex direction column, look what happens. It just moves that sorting icon back to the bottom there, which makes it into one column. So that's just what you have with Flex, and it's a lot. There's a lot of things that Flex can offer as well as the CSS grid. So yeah.
How do you add the CSS Flex to your form?
It's just a matter of adding the display as Flex right here. So if I remove this display and do, usually you'd go with inline block or things like that, right? But nowadays, modern CSS, they provide grid even, they provide Flex. So you just type in Flex there.
But I mean, like if you're creating the form in the designer mill, like you're way ahead of us. So how do you got to add the CSS to the form first, right?
Oh yeah. This is all CSS, and in the designer we add the when you build your CSS, you just add your file into your resource files here. So I've got it in styles.css. That block is written in that CSS file. And then one more thing is the swap class, the JavaScript that we're using. That is going to be responsible to make these like screen tips. For example, I've got my container here. This will turn into a class, so then I can specify my styling into that.
So that class is specified then in the CSS.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Can you show us the CSS?
Yeah. So here I've got the screen tip as my Flex, and so in my CSS code here, search for my Flex. It's gonna make use of this block here. I'm saying how to justify it, and then this is how it gets.
This Flex. Okay, so they can just reuse this. They can just take this from our sample and add this to their form, and then load the resource when the form opens, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now I want to show the colors as well. How we end up with this type of colors, right? So if I like look at the header here, we'll see. Let's see. Let me just look at one of the buttons.
What do you call this shade of purple?
It's a hex value, so you just take it from today's theme. So here we say input type equals button. We say the background color would be the variable light. So if you look at the variables here, these I just specified the name, that's just for my own naming. And then I specify the hex value. So if I start to change colors here, I'm in the debugger of the browser, right? So then I can just play around and see what looks better, what looks the best. So just changing that primary color already changed this background here and my text for the form title. If I start to want to change the button colors, let's go with something like orange or reddish. So I just change it there, and everything that is input, with specifying or making use of this variable will change on the fly.
But you still got to add the color to the CSS when you find the one you want, right?
Yeah, yeah, that will be in your root, which is right here. You specify all your global variables up in the root here. So then when you're happy in your debugger how it's looking like, you just grab it and paste it right here, overwrite that portion of the CSS file, reattach it in your resource files.
Cool. We've got a question. Are the checkboxes live on this form, or do you have to click edit and then select the checkbox?
It's a latter. Patrick also asked about that. We can't toggle here. It's just for viewing. It's read only. We need to click on this to show the overlay section and start checking and checking.
Yeah, so this is, I guess, kind of a limitation of this form's design, and we obviously have more work to do to make this form a little bit more usable. But we want to show the technique of filtering and sorting and large sets of data. And this is, Mel, if you just expand that and show all of the webinars, not just the upcoming. So when you have a lot here, the next thing we typically want to do is provide a way to search for them. And so with all of these now, let's search for dashboard. Actually, let's see all the webinars where we did a dashboard on. And then this filters it down. Now there's one really cool technique here that was pretty fast. And if you've got a lot of data, this kind of the inspiration for this topic today came from, once again, from Prestonwood. I want to thank Alicia and Richard for this inspiration today, because they have a form that has a lot of data in it, and they instead of actually querying back to SharePoint to filter the data, which can take time, we're filtering this actually in the form. Mel, can you talk a little bit about how that's done?
It's actually all Don's work. The logic
Oh,
behind
I'm
the scenes
sorry.
is Don.
Don,
Yeah, I'm
Don,
just
Don's here. Don, do you want to show how you added the conditional formatting for that?
Yeah. Instead of creating or building a filter string using Rust, what we added is a hide show formatting rule at the table. And Mel, if you could show it, if we could show the
I'm making it.
form.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Maybe the printer. Whatever works.
Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
I think so.
Thanks. Okay. So I'll just share out the
We should be demoing this in the Forms Designer.
I'm not familiar with Forms Designer yet. Okay. So I'm not sure if you guys are seeing my info path form
Yep,
design.
I can see it.
Okay, so here this is the first table, which uses a regular REST query. So instead of query building a string, we're using a filter logic here. So it's pretty long. And what it does is if it matches, if the date or title field matches the year filter or the title filter, it's going to just show those items. The other table uses a uh, REST query over here, which triggers this string REST to go, and it builds the string, and it's this one. It's So whenever you query a form, it's going to build a string and it's going to query the database, which is a bit slower than just hiding and showing the rows from the table.
Plus,
Yes.
isn't it true that the REST query doesn't allow you to do contains? I mean, I was looking at your REST query there, and I didn't see the same contains logic that I saw with the conditional formatting. I don't. I mean, I see
For
this.
contains, it uses substring off.
I see. Okay, so there is a contains.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
There is a contains. Yep. It's this
Okay.
one.
But yeah, that's great, Don. Thanks so much for jumping in here. I'm going to just quickly go back to my slides because we only have a limited amount of time today. But I want to show a couple more techniques. And once again, thanks to Don and Mel for doing this this webinar today. I'm just here for the ride. but let's talk a little bit about why this is important. So we'll do a couple more demos in a second, but first let's actually go back to the slides. And so we showed how to do these clickable buttons that can actually sort or filter the data based on what you type in, what the sort order is. And then you also want to be able to remove the filter. So when you're done with the filter, you want to be able to remove it. You can see my screen okay, Mel? You can. Okay, great. Yeah. So these are the techniques we're showing today. The paging is one technique we haven't showed yet. We did talk about the searching of specific items quickly. We'll show paging in a second. So why would you want to do all these things? Well, why would you want a dashboard form as opposed to a SharePoint view? And I think the reason is, number one, you can make it look however you want. You can make it responsive. Our form is responsive. So if you've got a browser that you can see it's changing the layout as I'm scrolling down the view. That's not something that is typical for SharePoint views. I mean, actually, I think the SharePoint modern views probably do that now. But you can also highlight things. You saw that we don't have anything highlighted here because there's no workflow that's kind of related to this. But if I go to a different form, let's take a look at another demo form here. This is a form we did for Chubb, which shows some highlighting. So it's an ergonometric form. It's assessing people's posture. So someone fills out a survey, and then we upload the surveys, and each one of these rows is a survey. And you can see that we can highlight the dashboard. This is not something you can do easily in SharePoint Designer. This is another example of a dashboard with sorting. Actually, I don't know if this one has sorting. You can see the filtering at the top, but it doesn't. I don't think it has sorting on the column headers yet. So that's another example of a form. You can make it look good. You can customize it to highlight items that are worthy of attention. Make it easier for users to quickly find, like, for example, the worst ergonometric score. You can also restrict the users to seeing only what they should see. So you can kind of give them these guardrails so they don't go off the road. And the road is the data that they need to act on, right? As opposed to everyone else's data, which might confuse them, and then maybe that you don't want to show them all the other data because there's some privacy issues. So that's another example of why you'd want to use a dashboard as opposed to a SharePoint view. The SharePoint views by default can be, users can go in there and modify them and see data so that you don't have the guardrails so much with SharePoint out of the box. And then these pop-ups. So we did the first demo. Let's do a couple more demos here. I'll do one more here, and this is the Central Flows demo that we've done in the past. And this is showing a dashboard form. I'm going to just have some data in here from another customer, but this is a lot of data on this form. You can see there's some highlighting there. And also, if you look on the right here, I've got this paging control. So I can actually change my view to be just show me 5 items. And then this paging control pops up at the bottom and allows me to page through the data. So this obviously 5 isn't really a very valid number, but if you do have a lot of data, like let's say hundreds and hundreds of rows, obviously the filtering is one way to quickly find stuff, but you can also give them a paging control, and that way it'll reduce the amount of time that the form is taking to display, which makes the form perception better. It's faster, it's quicker to respond. So how do you do all this stuff? Well, you saw how Mel added made the form look good. And you saw the buttons, and basically you're adding rules to buttons to change the conditional formatting, so you're only displaying items that match. And you saw how Don had done that with the condition. And then you can also rerun the query at the same time too. And so those are the two options. And my recommendation is not to rerun the query if you've got hundreds of items, but maybe you can also give them an automatic refresh every 5 minutes or so that it goes off and gets it behind the scenes. And then they're not impacted by that. So the filtering in place is a key technique here. Okay, any questions for us? I'm going to go back to our demo for a second here. And we're really talking about sorting data. And you can see the performance is pretty good there, even though we've got, I don't know, 10 years worth of webinars. about 10 years worth. You can see that we did about 30 a year. Last year we did 20, I think. In the year before, the pandemic's kind of been a hit a little bit, but this year we're off to a blazing start. We've got like 4 or 5 done already. So you can see those techniques there. Mel, anything else to add? Don, anything else to add to the webinar today?
That's it for me.
Yeah, I think that's it.
So it looks like we have a question. Thanks, Suzanne. Any exporting grid to Excel capabilities? So that's a great question, actually. We see, I had somebody ask me yesterday how they can export a Power BI to Excel. And because the Power BIs don't always have that option there, but I think it is included. So Mel, if we were going to take this form and export this data to Excel, how would we do that?
I think if we have the data in the list, right? Then we can export to Excel from the list, I guess. Right?
Well, couldn't you like just create like a comma separated value file, like a CSV file, like on the fly?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, so you could just take the data and you could just concatenate it together. It would be, you'd have to create the file from scratch, I guess. The other way to do it would be to, trying to think of another way to do it, but certainly if you had the data in SQL, you could also use SQL reporting services to generate an Excel spreadsheet, or you could just use Excel on top of SQL, obviously. But from the form itself, you'd have to create the CSV file and then save it somewhere and give them a link to open it. That would probably do it, but it would be a lot of work to create that CSV file. You could probably do it with a transform though, right, Mel? Probably transform the data into one big string. That might be a great topic for another webinar. Mel, were you going to say something?
No, I see some other questions.
Oh, yeah, we got more questions. Joe, great to see you, Joe. Happy 2022. Does the data in your form, demo form, reside in a SharePoint list? Don, do you want to take that?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Does the data in the form reside in a SharePoint list?
Yes, this is currently from a SharePoint list. We have 2 types of queries here. One is the regular SharePoint query, and the other is using the REST web services.
And these other dashboards though aren't using lists; they're using form libraries right now.
That dashboard is coming from SQL.
Okay, and then for example, this one here though is coming from a library, right, Don?
Yeah, library.
So it doesn't really, I guess it doesn't really matter if it's a list or a library. But obviously, if you're submitting the XML back, you can just treat the library as a list for your column data. Yeah, and then we've done things in the past with central flows, for example, where we actually extract data from within the form and show it, or show this workflow history. And this is coming from another list line in this case. So you can map the data out to a list and you query that instead of having to go into the XML. Thanks, Joe, for that question. Evan's got a question. I do Power Automate in CSV all the time. That's great to hear. I couldn't find it the other day with Power BI, but Power Automate would be a great way to do it, Susan. So if you're thinking, if you have well, you don't have Power Automate because you're not using SharePoint Online, I don't think. But for those of you who are using SharePoint Online, the Power Automate, the flow is one way to generate a CSV. And that's a great idea. Thanks for mentioning that, Evan. So you would have some trigger that you would have to, in order to fire the Power Automate, that would be I see you've got to click a button here that fires off a flow to generate. Yeah, so you've got the trigger there too. Your second comment is discussing that. Right, so you have to have a button in the form that sets some row that trigger the Power Automate to run. That's the key thing with that technique. And then the Power Automate would generate the CSV file or the Excel file that you would then open. So that's a great way to solve Suzanne's question, except she doesn't have SharePoint Online. So next week, we are going to take a break, but just don't forget that we've got you covered with forms. And if you need help to apply this technique, let us know. We'd love to jump on a quick call and show you how to do it. And thanks for being here. Hope you join us in a couple weeks, and we look forward to presenting the next topic. And I already forgot what that is, but we hope you will come back. Thank you so much.